A note of caution. Skingrad is an unusual place. Be prepared for the unexpected.
Count Janus Hassildor is discreetly pushing forward a plot to assert control over the province of Cyrodiil and beyond. He is facilitating a mass mind control via psychosis plan alongside the cult of necromancers and Manamarco himself, with assistance from his corrupt city watch and insidiously ambitious subjects. Guard Captain Dion keeps tabs on the small handful of denizens who act in secret, Tudius Sextius as supervisor, and the Cyril brothers working with two other undercover agents of Skingrad, fronting as venters to slowly infect the city's population and beyond by distributing human blood-contaminated wine across the continent. This blood is extracted in secret within the Skingrad dungeons on prisoners whose absence will not be noted, and synthesized by an asylum-seeking alchemist to slowly foster the people of Tamriel into a herd of thralls to serve the evil elite of the undead. One citizen within the city of Skingrad has caught a glimpse of what is going on, and though he may not have pieced together the whole picture, Glarthir might be onto something. That is the thesis. If you had something better to do, I just saved you this much time. If you think those are wild and baseless accusations, please hear me out as I present the foundation for this conspiracy. The evidence discovered in-game all points to one logical extrapolation, spanning across several different quests and NPC behaviors. Deciding exactly where to begin this theory has been quite challenging, though, like the player, we only begin to interact with Skingrad once we enter its gates. Almost immediately after we visit the city, if we speak to one of the many guards, we will be greeted with the only city-specific intro dialogue from a guard.
Hi. You're new here in Skingrad? Fine. I'll make sure the captain knows we have a stranger in town. Please, keep your weapons sheathed and use your best manners. We're a bit suspicious of strangers here. Don't give us anything to be suspicious about, will you please?
We are at once made aware that we are being monitored, and our presence reported to the City Watch captain. The overt distrust of strangers feels threatening. In telling the player that our mere existence in the city is suspect, we are given our first clue that there is much more at play behind the scenes in Skingrad. We could also draw a conclusion that if strangers are under a watchful eye, several citizens might be as well. As we explore the city, it's only a matter of time before we are cornered by Glarthir. Distressed and erratic, he tasks us to spy on 3 individuals to confirm whether they plot against him. For the last 20 years, players have trailed behind these characters and en masse have concluded that Glarthir lives up to the namesake of the quest he offers. With no outright examples of any NPCs tailing Glarthir, and no physical evidence of them conspiring against him, paranoia has been cast as the game design example for Oblivion's Radiant AI system, where, even if a character's life is uninteresting, the novelty of following around an AI to watch them perform everyday activities gives an inherent potential for interest. The typical end to this quest will have the player explain that not one of his suspects is spying on him, and Glarthir attacking the player. It's all too easy for us to conclude that Glarthir is a delusional maniac. But when we actually observe the characters Glarthir suspects, alongside other people of interest in Skingrad, it becomes clear that there is something strange happening. We may not find a conspicuous note that reads, "Yes, we are spying on Glarthir," but when we look at the bigger picture, incorporating the city itself, several residents in it, almost every quest that links to or through Skingrad, the truth becomes frighteningly apparent. Those quests in question are more often than not what motivates the player to make their first visit to the city. The most likely quest is one of several on the journey to acquire all the Mages Guild recommendations. When we venture to find Ulterior, we discover that he has been trapped within a cave infested with the undead, seemingly overnight. The presence of and origin of these zombies is never explained. We are told Ulterior makes regular trips back to town once a week. So how did a plethora of zombies enter the cave in such a calculated window of time? The player will almost certainly not ask this question, as it is easy to hand-wave the scenario as a typical fantasy trope rescue. However, this is the first example of a strange onset of undead associated with the city of Skingrad. Maybe the player is more physically inclined than intellectually. The Fighters Guild will task the player, along with Glarthir, to retrieve a journal from another nearby cave. Glarthir tells us that he defaulted on the contract due to the danger associated with Fallen Rock Cave. When entering, we see that it is also filled with the undead. It's easy to pick on Glarthir, but who can blame him? He does have a family to support. Considering that the subject of the contract is a journal of a random researcher, it begs the question of why he could not retrieve the journal himself. This seems like another sudden onset of undead spilling into the nearby caves around Skingrad. Coincidence, perhaps, but we still need a third example to establish a pattern. What about Whodunit, the fan-favorite quest in the fan-favorite quest line? Let's consider that the house for sale in Skingrad, Rosethorn Hall, is only available to purchase as the current owner has defaulted on his mortgage. Who then is paying for Summit Mist Manor? Fafnir, the doorman? Maybe. There are a couple of rumors which spread after this quest, so surely the City Watch would question whoever is listed as the owner. The thrill of this quest makes the thought of law and order disappear, but maybe there is a hint of state-sanctioned foul play. The setup of the whole affair reads like a cold sacrifice of 5 lives, the bonus for which relies on playing on the fear of those set to die. A most sinister quest for a most sinister city. The Thieves Guild will also send the player to Skingrad. In Lost Histories, we are tasked with stealing a certain book held within the castle itself. We are not the first or even second thief involved with this quest. Theranos was given the job and found himself imprisoned along with Amuse. It then becomes a matter of breaking into the county dungeon to question either of them for the book's location. Here we find neither of the fellow thieves, but another prisoner who gives us some concerning information. The Pale Lady, a member of Castle Skingrad, makes a task of interrogating the prisoners. The Skingrad jailer fills us in, naming her as Mina, and lets us know that her role is firmly established in the castle. We sneak our way through the secret underground tunnels beneath the castle to find, hidden in the wine cellar, a torture chamber and a hostile vampire. The body of Theranos lies dead, and Amuse stands behind a set of iron bars awaiting his demise. The room is littered with various torture instruments, bottles of human blood, and Cyrilli Brothers wine. This is the first piece of evidence that clues us into the evil within Skingrad. Let's break down what is really being shown to us in this scene. A vampire, employed by the county, with access to secret tunnels leading into the dungeon, who transports prisoners to a torture chamber, who over several days extracts their blood into bottles until their deaths, who will comment while in combat either, "I will feed the mistress your blood," or "Your blood will be sweet nectar for the lady," while hidden in a secret chamber of the wine cellar. That's a lot to process, and none of it is morally sound. Starting with the vampire part, Pale Lady is not the only vampire housed in the castle. The Count and his wife are afflicted with the curse as well. Secret tunnels are not necessarily evil, but most secret passageways in castles are for escape of the nobility, not for transporting prisoners. Torture chambers are common in castles also, but are typically seen as immoral overall. The torture methods here are extremely suspect. We don't see how exactly it happens, but the blood of prisoners is siphoned into bottles. The bottles in question have the exact appearance of the bottles used to house Cirilli Brothers wine. There are other instances of human blood, like those held by Vincent Valtieri. This also happens to be right next to the castle's wine cellar. Frankly, there are only so many ways to analyze this. The most clear-cut interpretation is to suggest that the Pale Lady is employed by Count Hassildor to siphon the blood of prisoners into bottles of wine for his consumption. The prisoners in question might be doomed upon their sentence, as petty thievery might not warrant their deaths. But Theranos stole from the castle, and as such had to explore it thoroughly. Who knows what he witnessed during his search, what secrets he uncovered. When he was caught, his fate was sealed, as a precaution if nothing else. He happened to share a cell with Amusei, who he shared his guild mission with, which would have sealed Amusei's fate in tandem, were it not for the player's intervention. What the Pale Lady says in combat sparks some questions. Who is this mistress or lady? The only logical answer is Rona Hassildor, wife to the Count. But this has a conflict of facts. The Pale Lady says she will use our blood to feed her, but the Count will tell us she refused to feed and fell into a coma as a result. So what are we to think is the truth? We don't know exactly how long any vampire can go without feeding without entering this coma state. In-game lore is inconclusive, and there are different clans and breeds of vampires. In Skyrim, we free Serana after countless years and meet her mother in the Soul Cairn for an equal amount of time, but both of whom are daughters of Cold Harbor, and not on par with the typical vampire. Lord Leviticus has been entombed in his keep for several years as well, but though perhaps rabid, is awake and active. The glass is beginning to tip over. Too many obscure questions are laid in front of the player with not one sufficient answer. The ominous castle looming over Skingrad is a house of cards verging on collapse. 3 vampires, acting in strange ways, performing dubious acts for the sake of what? The answer might be more clear if we had first-hand experience as a vampire ourselves. It is not long after we become a vampire that we may wish to be cured. After a possible referral, Raminus Polus will send us to see Count Hassildor. The Count tells us many things. First, that he and his wife were turned over 50 years ago. Second, he embraced the affliction and prefers to exercise the strengths it gives him. Third, his wife despised it and refused to feed, thus inducing a coma. Fourth, the Count's trusted servants prolong her life. Fifth, the cure is for his wife, not himself. Sixth, the Count cannot take up the search himself and relies on the player to perform the steps to find the cure. Seventh, the only clue he has is a report on a Glenmoral witch near the Corbolo River. 50 years is quite some time. Taking into account his appearance, the Count's true age must be approaching a century. The portrait hanging in the castle hall is likely the last true image of Janus Hassildor, now hidden away from his subjects. While feudal governments, to my knowledge, have no age limit on their rulers, if my president was almost 100 years old and still looked middle-aged, I would have some questions. His apparent vampirism is secondary to his isolation. A Colovian human only has so many years which he can live without raising suspicion. Count Hassildor is fast approaching that limit. When we factor this, we can begin to sense a level of urgency and panic with our interactions with him. He allows slips in his dialogue, pitfalls, and even lies that the everyday player will not consider. Most vampires we meet in-game are hostile, but of the few we can interact with, none seem too keen on curing their own vampirism. Count Hassildor is no exception. It appears the strengths far outweigh the weaknesses, even when serving as a head of the state. An Imperial man is already convincing enough as a speaker. Throw in some vampire-boosted illusion magic, as well as powerful abilities of persuasion or seduction, and the prospect becomes alluringly powerful. The only exception, aside from the player, is Rona Hassildor. We can't say for certain how long she has been in her coma state, or how long after turning she grew to despise her condition. Perhaps the most peculiar aspect of Rona is what we do not know. We might not even be able to say that her existence is public knowledge. There is no additional dialogue or text referencing the wife of the most enigmatic count in Cyrodiil, which is kind of suspicious. The trusted servants are safely assumed to be all uniquely named castle NPCs. Mina, or the Pale Lady, Hassildor, Mercator Hositis, and Shumgro Yarg. Mina's role is to extract the blood and supposedly feed Rona against her will. And if this is the case, it's strange that this has not awoken her. Perhaps it only keeps her alive like an IV connected to a hospital patient, but that's as far as we can stretch her purpose, and raises impossible questions itself. Hassildor is our direct communicator with the Count, and will lead us to Rona's secret chamber. She is also probably who manages which prisoners are sent to Mina, evaluating how likely it is their absence would raise any questions. Mercator, a practicing necromancer, assists with the disposal of the bodies, and it's he who relays the knowledge of a Glenmoral witch to Hassildor. Shumgro Yarug ensures that all other personnel, watch guards, and slopdregs don't go sniffing too far within the castle, placing special emphasis not to linger near the wine cellar. As for why Hassildor wants to cure his wife, I see this as a villain's one true weakness or vulnerability, which causes them to perform a singular act of good or kindness. His love for his wife, and obligation as a husband, compel him to honor her life with the one thing she can truly desire. It would be too simple to ease her suffering by killing her outright. The whole quest's purpose is to perform an irredeemable man's last act of good for the only thing he loves as much as the power he covets. The quest alone does much of the heavy lifting as to why many players will walk away with Hassildor in very high regard. Everything else surrounding the man and the city he operates is mired in malevolence. It is a likely truth that the Count is incapable of venturing out himself or sending one of his trusted servants. As we will learn later, his presence does attract other vampires, even if his appearance may go unnoticed. As for his servants, sending a meager steward or a butler to parley with a witch could well spell their doom. Even sending Mercator places the Count in a vulnerable position. Mercator is a cold, calculating individual. Knowing the desires of the Count sets him up to bargain for power, even if he was capable of defeating the threats the quest might pose. Though Mercator has relayed to the Count reports of a witch near the Corbolo River, her home just happens to be sitting underneath Dark Fissure, a cave infested with other necromancers and features a black soul gem shrine. This Glenmoral witch, Melisande, is clearly a covert necromancer. In her hidden basement hatch, we find a wide assortment of poisons, skulls, limbs, and caskets. Her request for her assistance is 5 empty grand soul gems, a strange task until we remember Dark Fissure is a short walk away. A former witch should not be trusted lightly. Look at the space she inhabits, and it's clear that Melisande is deep into nefarious dealings. This is the first extension of Hassildor's web of evil influence. That influence is sustained and rooted deep within necromancy. Hassildor's court is overseen primarily by Mercator Hositis, an undercover necromancer. Soon after we gain entry into the Arcane University, we will be given the Ulterior Motives quest. This quest has a core theme of deception and trickery, not only on the part of Mercator, but the Council of Mages and the Count of Skingrad. We should take this quest's namesake at face value, for everyone involved has their own motivation hidden from the player and from each other. We are tasked to retrieve a particular book from the Count. This is a ploy from the Council of Mages to determine if Hassildor is aligned with the Necromancers or not. The book is never identified by title, but it is likely one of the 3 unique books found in Hassildor's room: the formerly mentioned Lost Histories of Tamriel, the one-act play A Hypothetical Treason, or The Wolf Queen, Book 2. For a book that the Mages Guild would request back, which could give reason to ascertain Hassildor's allegiances to the Necromancers. It makes the most thematic sense to have it be the Wolf Queen, part of the story of Potema, one of the most infamous necromancers in the lore. In requesting it back, the Council of Mages is essentially saying, that interest you have in necromancy, you need to let it go. Now. The climax of this quest sees various slips from Mercator's and Hassildor's speech and actions. Mercator tells us that the Count does not even know of the ambush taking place, and that the Necromancers cannot allow the Guild to interfere with their plans, for the Count or otherwise. You could break this dialogue down into meaning that the Necromancers have separate plans for Hassildor as well as other plans across a larger scale. Or you could read it as not allowing the Mages Guild to interfere on behalf of the Count or on behalf of any other reason. Here is where the ulterior motive of the Necromancers is laid out. Mercator has established himself close to the Count, as with Hassildor's assistance and authority, many avenues of operation are open to the Necromancers, whether they decide to have Hassildor mantle a leadership role or if he is more disposable. The Count will arrive just in time to assist the player in combat before immediately chastising the player. Already we have a conflict of information. Either Mercator did not tell the Count and Hassildor discovered our whereabouts through other means, or Mercator lied to us in an effort to demoralize the player to gain an advantage. Also consider the time that this ambush takes place, in the middle of the night. The perfect time for Hassildor to leave the castle unburdened by the sun, when it would be just as easy to set up the meeting in a more obscure location during the day. This setup seems like a choice opportunity to involve the Count. Not only that, it also feels like an exceedingly rushed encounter, as if our involvement has thrown off the plans of the Necromancers and of Hassildor. Hassildor calls our intelligence into question for allowing ourselves to be so easily fooled. This is a power play to throw off the player's judgment and elevate Hassildor's authority so that we will readily accept what he tells us. This does not stop him telling a possible lie and immediately correcting himself, however. Notice how he knew about Mercator, but not his friends, will quickly evolve into he suspected Mercator was involved in their cult, but was unwilling to move against him without knowing the identities of his allies. How long exactly was Hassildor aware of Mercator? How much longer would he have allowed him to remain his steward with this knowledge? It doesn't add up. This dynamic is Machiavellian, with either party attempting to abuse their power and position to influence the other as best they can through subterfuge and insinuation. When the player throws the scales off balance, both the Necromancers and Hassildor are forced to make snapshot decisions. Hassildor feels it best to play into this sudden change of events and turn on Mercator and his sect. To act otherwise would directly inform the Guild that the Count is indeed in league with the Necromancers and Mannimarco. This is Hassildor's ulterior motive. The location of the ambush feels nonsensical for a time, until it's understood that the Cursed Mine is one of few locations near to Skingrad not currently infested with the undead. The goal, it seems, would be to begin the corruption of Cursed Mine, with the player to serve as the first undead within. Mercator and his allies, along with the Count, would then descend into the mine, clear out the population, and resurrect it as dead thralls. Since the death of the player would signal to the Council of Mages what they feared most, the need to establish another base of the undead would act as the fourth defensive pool from which to deter offensives against the city. The first being Fallen Rock Cave, second being Bleak Flats Cave, and third, the most ominously named Bloodcrust Cavern. Later in the Mages Guild questline, during Information at a Price, the Count will have a complex interweaving issue stemming directly from this cavern. A clan of vampires drawing in a band of vampire hunters now patrolling the city streets. If the Count's words and actions during Ulterior motives fell under scrutiny, they disintegrate in Information at a Price. Hassildor begins by downplaying the impact the situation is having on both himself and his city. The vampire hunters, we are told, have been led by rumors of vampires in Skingrad. The rumor is not vampires near Skingrad, or even vampires attacking Skingrad or its citizens, but vampires in Skingrad. The city has housed 3 individual vampires at any given point, plus the tenuous relationship with the Council of Mages, and the odd released prisoner retelling horror stories of inmates dragged away, never to return, is little reason to doubt that a loose lip has allowed the truth to break loose. The vampire hunters are patrolling Skingrad, only extending a stone's throw away from either of the city gates. The hunters notably patrol during daytime as opposed to night. This is a calculated strategy to determine which of the citizens remain indoors while the sun is out, and through process of elimination, would discover that the very Count of the county is a vampire himself. When probed about the vampires, he will immediately defend himself from the purpose of their presence. He will then, in the same breath, claim that this is not the first time something like this has happened, and that the vampires are aware of his power and position. The strangest part of this quest's premise is that the city guards cannot involve themselves in any way. This brings about a handful of important questions. Are City Watch simply not required to defend against threats outside the immediate city limits? This does seem likely, given the presence of the Imperial Legion foresters and patrolling legionnaires. But Hassildor's dialogue leans further towards insinuating that direct action against the vampires would create a potential for his identity being compromised. It would, after all, be far too simple for the Count to order his guard to march on the cavern, or direct either of his stewards to. But here another question is raised. How does Hassildor know the location of the vampires? Can he detect their presence just as they supposedly can detect his? Or has he led them here as bait to rid his city of the vampire hunters? Which came first, the chicken or the egg? I think that the Bloodcrust Cavern clan of vampires were led by the Count himself, as evidenced by the conspicuous copy of a guide to Skingrad on a table within the cavern. Regarding the vampire hunters, they are clearly resolute and determined in their mission. There are few creatures as despised in their existence or as romanticized in their killing as vampires. The Count tells us outright that he views the vampires as little more than animals to be exterminated, but he has a strange aversion and even malice towards the vampire hunters. When asked how to deal with their presence, the Count's first suggestion is to murder them. Hassildor even states that he would murder them himself if he had any real possibilities to, and tells the player that if they choose to murder them themselves, the city guard will respond accordingly. The Count all but says he expects the hunters to die one way or the other. Hassildor's only additional dialogue about them is if we send them away from the town unharmed after we slay the vampires ourselves. He even seems surprised that we did this. This is another example of Hassildor sacrificing pawns in order to maintain control over the board. He bluffs us with his downplaying. He is clearly more concerned with preserving his facade as a simple reclusive ruler than removing the vampires near his city. He refuses to involve himself or his guards or any asset which might provoke the slightest inquiry, and he cares nothing for the lives of the hunters. The biggest sacrifice he makes is his knowledge of Mana Marco, his most powerful piece, the King of Worms, and he has been forced to cut the Necromancer loose before his plans drag himself down with them. Is it really any wonder how Count Hassildor, whose steward is a necromancer, and whose surrounding caves are populated with undead, and is a powerful wizard by reputation, has knowledge of Mana Marco? Enough knowledge to identify his general location? This screams second-hand knowledge conveyed to the Count by Mercator Hosidus, the true devout of Mana Marco. The question is not, how did the Count learn of Mana Marco? The question is, what are the Count and Mana Marco planning? Who is being leveraged more? What has either already done for the other? Who fits where on the hierarchy, and who will come out on top? Mana Marco is outright and visible in his attack on the Mages Guild and Cyrodiil as a whole. Count Janus Hassildor is far more subtle in his approach, so subtle in his methodology that it is almost invisible to the average onlooker. But we know one of these onlookers, and he is far from average. We finally follow the trail back to Glarthir. It is hard to play defense for Glarthir, as he makes his stance difficult to understand, and he is either wrong or misdirected in his suspicions. To state plainly, yes, Glarthir is being followed and observed, but not by all who he suspects. Consider that no matter who you talk to in Skingrad about Glarthir, without exception, word will get back to Captain Dion. A little bird told him about our inquiries, and he is adamant that we describe our conversation with Glarthir in full. Dion's position is to monitor the town eccentric, but this can't hold up either by itself or when Glarthir is compared to some of Skingrad's other quirky residents. And what about the residents of Skingrad? Why is there such a dense amount of strange or unhinged NPCs localized within the city? Lazar Milvin is a rampant narcissist. Salmo the baker, Eurus the shepherd, and Undina Orethi all have an eerily dull and strange manner of speaking, as if their wits have suffered some damage. There is a more literal eccentric who makes regular visits to Skingrad, Damriel of the Imperial City. For individuals on the crazy spectrum, these 5 are ranking higher than Glarthir does. And what about the spiteful Elsie Godhater, who detests the Divines and serves the Mythic Dawn cult? You might notice that Elsie is actually Glarthir's only true outspoken critic, and when asked, gives a unique answer that is a harsh summary of his character. But how trustworthy is Elsie really? In Glarthir's note in his basement, he theorizes several groups that trace back to the source of the conspiracy in Skingrad. One of those groups is the Mythic Dawn. What if Elsie saw Glarthir as a potential recruit into the cult, being ostracized by the city and with a weakened morale? Glarthir is not a dimwit, however, so this attempt would backfire. Now Elsie is forced to play damage control. How ironic that Elsie Godhater has the audacity to claim Glarthir is dangerous. She is attempting to poison the well, which she could not drill into for herself. Then we have everyone's favorite example of a weird character, Philanu Halalu. If Glarthir is the resident eccentric, what does that make Halalu? A clear necrophiliac. Halalu is confidently incorrect to call herself the only alchemist in Skingrad. She even directs us to Sindarion during the Seeking Your Roots quest. In that same dialogue, we get the infamous voice line, But what has been lost in the meme is the slip that she is on the run from federal punishment in Morrowind for her crimes. If her crimes are related to her fascinations, the ancestor-worshipping Dunmer would have a long prison sentence for her. Hlaalu has fled Morrowind and is trying to start a new life for herself in Cyrodiil. But that new life might not have begun in Skingrad. Knowledgeable or explorative players may have learned she is one of the few NPCs with knowledge of Daedric shrines, or would have found the now burned down remains of another shop with the same name as hers, All Things Alchemical, along the Red Ring Road. Don't forget that Hlaalu also happens to live just across from an abandoned house overrun with the undead, the House of Nerestorel. Oh yeah, this city, which is ruled by an undead count married to his undead wife, whose thirst for blood is satiated by another undead torturess, and is surrounded by caves filled with the undead, just so happens to have a house owned by a mysterious NPC we never meet, filled with the undead. This house is right across the street from Hlaalu, who takes a romantic interest in the dead. On the top floor of Nerestorel's house is a dedicated alchemy setup. Hlaalu's claim of being the only alchemist in town might be indirectly telling us that she is the only dedicated alchemist as of now. No one in town has anything to say about Nerestorel in direct conversation or through overheard rumor. The existence of this character has been memory-holed away. So who was this person, and why are they missing? Or more likely dead? Nerestorel must have been a former alchemist of some renown. The house with their name is quite nice and sizable, despite being filled with clutter and decay. All the more suspicious that no one seems to know who or where they are. Let's rewind to the Castle Skingrad wine cellar. Within a hidden chamber, we find those bottles of human blood inside Cyrilli Brothers bottles and next to the bottles of actual Cyrilli Brothers wine. Why is the blood of the prisoners being siphoned into these bottles? Is the Count using it to feed himself? To feed his wife against her will? To trade with the clan of vampires in Bloodcrust Cavern so they remain stationed near his city? Why wine specifically? Could the blood become infused with the wine itself? What would happen to the average person who drank this wine? Skingrad is the wine capital of Cyrodiil. If the goal was to infect the population, it would be all too easy to disguise blood wine in regular shipments across the country. But you couldn't just put half a bottle of blood and half a bottle of wine together and mix it up. You would need to take a scientific approach to ensure equal distribution chemically so that the result is still palatable, yet retains its desired effects when ingested. You would need an alchemist. You would also need someone who you can trust or coerce into subordination. A dark elf sexual deviant fleeing the law of her home country might just be the ideal candidate. Supply her with asylum and a means to make a living, and she would obey orders to the letter without question. But Hlaalu is no master of alchemy. Perhaps Nerestorel was the first choice of Hassildor, but was either compromised or made the mistake of refusing his offer. Those of House Hlaalu are known for their shady business dealings and ruthless strategies, so when approached by the Count to take the role of synthesizer, it came with extra stipulations. A few sly handshakes and false promises later, Nerestorel could be standing within his alchemy shop's second location, moments before it was set on fire in an act of arson. Arson perpetrated from within the building, which we can extrapolate from the 3 potions of fire resist on the ground. The all things alchemical key is squarely in Hlaalu's hands, now the only alchemist in Skingrad. So the Count has a steady supply of blood, a controllable synthesizer to infuse it into wine. All he needs now is distribution. Enter the Cyrilli brothers. The brothers, in contrast to most city-based NPCs, are assigned the rogue class, a deliberate choice to highlight the brothers' underhanded nature. If we enter the Skingrad City Guard barracks, we will find 4 different loose pieces of Skingrad City Guard armor. These are belonging to David, Gaston, Ambroge, and Riemann Broder, all undercover, working for Castle Skingrad. Riemann Broder and Ambroge Khan are experienced warriors and even trainers in martial arts. Why is it that a wine field requires armed security? Often you will find Gaston working in his backyard while Ambroge stands alert at the gate. These 2 hired hands are less for growing wines and more for protection. Count Hassildor established the Cyrilli brothers as up-and-coming vintners to rival Tamika, promising the fruitful pension of retirement at the end of their service. That service began to act as a front for the secret distribution of blood-infused wine. Tamika's wines are considered superior, so any alteration would be noticed quickly. But the Cyrilli brothers' cheaper costs allow for more of the population to imbibe in their vices. Broder and Khan are sent to make sure no one gets too close to the truth, and possibly eliminate the brothers if they lose their nerve, or try to get the upper hand over the Count. So while the Cyrilli brothers are placed on a higher platform, they are held up by their security. On the subject of Riemann Broder, he is a member of the Thieves Guild. Why would the guild rely on the player to infiltrate the castle if there was already an active member in the city? It is because Broder is already too well involved with the secrets that haunt Castle Skingrad, and his betrayal would spell his death. But it could be that Broder, at least, wants to find a way out of his position. A potential ally of his and fellow Thieves Guild member, Ulterior, makes a monthly trip to the city, during which he will make a patrol at midnight between several homes which house the key players involved in this plot: Broder, Ambroge, Glarthir, Bernadette, and the Cyrilli brothers. Perhaps there is no honor among thieves, with now 2 possible members refusing to assist the Ranis, but maybe that honor is only shared between Broder and Ulterior. When Glarthir tasks us with trailing his 3 suspects, especially without any surrounding information about the city or its residents, you would be forgiven for hardly engaging with a task so menial and boring. Thus, players miss tiny odd details that give cause for suspicion. To put it simply, Glarthir is being watched. Engage with any Skingrad citizen, and soon you will be approached by Captain Dion and interrogated about your interaction. Dion's little birds happen to be everyone in town, as Glarthir is a constant topic of discussion and gossip. Again, without the surrounding insights, we can easily see Glarthir as the crazy man he is presented as. 3 specific individuals he asks us to investigate. If we specifically search for links directly to Glarthir, we will not find them. But when looking into them as an isolated group, the patterns become evident. Starting with the first suspect, Bernadette Pinellas. Bernadette, especially, can lead to an average player to dismiss this quest's objective entirely after spending 3 real-world minutes watching Bernadette rake Tamika's backyard. Outright, Bernadette is the least suspicious, and least likely involved with the other key players, but she may play some small role. She keeps a rather reclusive schedule, starting the day with a morning trip to the chapel. Here she sits in prayer for some time. Her path happens to cross with Ambroge Khan, who makes a daily morning prayer to Debella. Suggesting anything not explicitly in the AI package is theory, but theoretically, information could be exchanged between the 2. They tend to also leave the chapel at the same time. She then works in Tamika's vineyard with Shamir. Here, that same theoretical information could be passed to him. What is definite is that she will take her lunch not within Tamika's field, but will stroll over to the Cyrilli brothers' shed to eat. Why walk all that way? Shamir tends to also take lunch with the Cyrillis. That theoretical data would end its cycle here, being conveyed back to David or Gaston. The last noteworthy part of Bernadette's day is tending to Tamika's backyard. The atypical lunch is a flag. It seems innocuous. Why have Ambrose tell her information to relay if he could just report directly to his employers later in the day? But that could be exactly the reason. To play a game of telephone and ensure there are no gaps in communication. The Cirilli brothers give Ambrose the task to deliver news to Bernadette, who would then deliver it back to the brothers to make sure there was still data integrity. Shamir could either be another person to relay it to, acting as a double failsafe, or he could be attempting to pry a fabricated secret from her to determine if she is easily compromised with sensitive info. If Bernadette got cold feet suddenly, who better to stand over her than a highly trained marksman to pick her off as she attempts to flee? So, while there is little to analyze, Bernadette is not entirely insignificant. And if we started Paranoia with observing all the suspects known at the start, I imagine many more would start to heed some truth to Glarthir's worries. It must be said that Bernadette has the least significant role, however. Perhaps she is working to infiltrate Tamika's vineyard in tandem with the Cirillis. Maybe she is in a similar position to Glarthir, who happened to stumble into something far greater than she realized, and is also checking over her shoulder, not looking to cause further trouble and risk her own life. Tailing Tudius Sextius is where some real clues can be discerned, even without prior quest knowledge. To begin, Tudius makes a daily trip to the castle. Notably, once arriving at the bridge, the nearby guard will escort Tudius across. Tudius may have a closer relation to the city guard than most Skingrad citizens, as he lives directly across from the guard barracks. It could also play into his upper-class status. Tudius will tell us, quite arrogantly in fact, that his family has been very well established in Skingrad for some time. He even gives us a strange time frame, since the dawn. There is a specific era in lore known as the Dawn Era, which was the origin time frame for most of the lore, though it doesn't appear to link in any way or time as Tudius mentions it. This could be a figure of speech in the world, though. It never reappears. He mentions that his father and Count Hassildor were good friends, so this phrase could relate in some way to the Count's vampiric nature. Arriving to the castle, he will stroll and gossip with the stewards and guards. Sextius is one of two characters in the city who makes these regular visits, the other being Vander Allen Trebadius, whose appearance can be dismissed as negotiating his home's mortgage or a relocation of his former Arena faction AI package. Considering the distanced to even hostile nature of the stewards, it's noteworthy that his presence is entertained at all, which gives credence to his connections to the Count. While what we hear are generic rumors, more often than not a Glarthir rumor, what could he actually be discussing, theoretically? Following Sextius later in the day, he will take a ride on his horse around the wine fields. You might link this location to Bernadette, and later with the Cirilli brothers. Sextius may be overseeing the ground operations of the blood wine distribution. His horse is stabled and presumably saddled by Tilmo. Tilmo also happens to share a lunch with Riemann Broder. Tilmo has a perfect spot to observe both fields and funnel potentially sensitive information. As such, he could be a helping hand in this endeavor. Early in the day, Sextius reports to the stewards what he observed the previous evening, or is given specific instruction or details to watch as he patrols the vineyards. If Tudius notices anything not going according to plan, or Tilmo relays something to him from Broder that raises alarm or suspicion, it gets sent up the chain. From there, the stewards can help to remediate any production hurdles, or pull the plug on operations to stay secure and unnoticed. It could even be what would prompt them to order Riemann Broder, Ambrose Khan, or Shamir to take out Bernadette, Gaston, or David. It is not as though Tudius himself is in a protected position. Despite his Nazim-like attitude and apparent familial connections, Sextius is just as easily disposed of, whether he is aware of it or not. He is a useful idiot, as Stalin would put it. He believes himself to be an essential part of the plan, but his role is little more than a middleman between the grunts and the bosses. Once the time is right, he will be removed from the board, whether by Broder as he roams an isolated field, or in the dead of night, while he sleeps as a certain guard captain seals his fate. And we end our spying with the supposed ringleader, David Cirilli. The astute player will have noticed by now that all three suspects can be associated with this one particular location, the city vineyards. This is the first place David will head to start his mornings, where he will work until noon and then returns home for a quick lunch. He finishes back up at the vineyard before going to sleep at midnight. There's nothing to really crack open in his routine. David is quite the busybody, but there are two Cirilli brothers. How does Gaston compare, and what can we learn when we look at both of them? Gaston sleeps in an hour past when David leaves for work and trails behind him to the vineyard. He will work alongside his brother and Riemann Broder until their shared lunch at 1 p.m. Gaston stays over to watch the fields, while David returns home. At 3, when David returns from his lunch, Gaston heads back to their house to work in the backyard with Ambrose Khan. It might be more correct to say that he works while Ambrose watches over him, guarding the gate with his weapons at the ready. He works until 8, and then he idles in his yard until he goes inside to sleep. Is this 3-hour lunch interlude a strange gap of time? Two brothers should have a strong enough bond to share a meal together, at least on occasion. It also seems like David is the more dedicated of the two, with Gaston sleeping in and standing idle, though he does stand guard over the field to ensure no one can interfere with the operations. Interestingly, Ambrose does not work in the field with the brothers or Broder at all. He is exclusively tasked with manning his post in the Cirilli brothers' backyard. It's almost as if he's protecting something or keeping others away from something. But what could that be? In one of Glarthir's notes on David, he accuses him of burying evidence. This evidence would be easy enough for Gaston to pick up or conceal further, likely for a vampire courier under nightfall to smuggle a few bottles of a particular vintage. This 3-hour gap is not simply a lunch break. This is a divisive moment when David selects a number of bottles to be transferred. He sets them up, prepares them for Gaston for pickup, alongside some carefully written instructions. Then Gaston picks up the pieces and skillfully hides them in their very backyard to be uncovered later by a delivery man for the clan of vampires in Bloodcrust Cavern who serve Count Hassildor. The motivation is as simple as history: wealth and power. With additional funding and support from the castle, Cirilli Brothers wines are on a fast track to destroy or absorb Tamika's wines. Without extrapolating all of the surrounding details from all the other quests which run through Skingrad, this would absolutely sound like insane paranoid ramblings. But there is simply not much room to interpret these character schedules after the fact. We also need to rationalize an indirect admission from the brothers that they are well aware of Glarthir's suspicions. If we ask David or Gaston about him, they will give us a dialogue that frames them as aware yet accepting of his eccentric nature. They go as far as to say that Glarthir has never given them any trouble. This turns out to be a lie, in fact. If we deliver Glarthir's list of death, either brother will then say, quite contrarily, that they should have known something was wrong when he attempted to break into their home, which, for all we know, could be another lie. while we are at this juncture of the quest, why is it that Glarthir is outright killed, which seems to be accepted or pardoned vigilante justice? Legally speaking, this is weighed much more in the Cyrilli's favor as self-defense, but we can find Claudius Arcadia imprisoned for performing the Black Sacrament, a much more secure means of killing an individual than a mere list of death. Even the guards make no attempt at an arrest and deliver capital punishment on the spot. The purpose of this expose has not been to justify or reinforce Glarthir's actions. From the start, it was aimed to shine light on the evil hiding beneath Skingrad's surface. The city's darkness is broadcasted on the city crest, its a blood-red sun forever eclipsed. Glarthir's notion of the conspiracy is framed kind of selfishly, admittedly, and while he won't tell the player what exactly his full breakdown of the conspiracy is, for our own safety, he says, we can succinctly conclude he misunderstands or cannot comprehend the full picture. It does have to be said that he still is the only citizen of Skingrad that has picked up on the few clues hiding in plain sight. Glarthir is pointedly incorrect in his theories, but his knowledge of the group-level operators has placed the target on his back, and therefore, Glarthir is not paranoid. Let's give some due diligence and proper investigation towards Glarthir, as we have the others in this cursed city. Beginning with his home, it strikes us as kind of odd. Glarthir's house is a phenomenal piece of real estate, even against the standards of Skingrad. If we case the homes of the other individuals, their stature is reflected in the owner's status. Halalu's, Tudius's, and Cyrilli brothers' homes are all quite regal, but they are occupied by a monopolized marketeer, a successor to generational wealth, and a pair of already successful vintners now in the pocket of the castle. This has the player ponder, what exactly does Glarthir do for a living? There are no shortage of paintings which clutter his home, leading me to conclude, if anything, he operates in the art sector. A curator, perhaps. Framing Glarthir as a curator is much to his benefit, admittedly, as well as this theory. It would add some new understanding to the level of artwork he possesses and the minor armory he owns or has begun to collect in addition to his artwork, maybe as a means to protect his trade artifacts from thieves. And under that specific lens, we could layer another interpretation of Riemann Broder's and Othrelos' presence in the city. An art heist is kind of lacking during the Thieves Guild questline, and maybe Glarthir could have been an early target in development. A career in the art world would also serve to handwave other minor eccentricities present in his home and character. The most notable of these supposed insanities is the wastebasket containing 800 gold. I would not even consider this crazy behavior, to be honest. Glarthir is clearly a man of wealth, and realistically, his trash can is as smart a hiding place as any for his money. If we wanted to steal his gold, the chests he has would be our first and only place to check. In fact, the only crazy thing we can say about Glarthir based on our own observations is that he owns 4 copies of the same book. Furthermore, when digesting Glarthir's library, he seems to be a very well-read and spiritual individual. He owns the only set copy of The True Nature of the Orcs, and one of 2 copies of Spirit of the Daedra, the only other of which is in the Mystic Archives. He owns one of 3 copies of The Brothers of Darkness. When contrasted with the vast majority of NPCs, Glarthir's interests in fields ranging from the arts of magic to racial histories to religious and occult histories and Daedric understanding places him intellectually in the top percentile of Cyrodiil. Glarthir, it seems, was living a life of a luxurious refinement and taste until one fateful day he was in the wrong place at the wrong time to witness the wrong people do the wrong thing or say the wrong words in his presence. He can't investigate too much further without compromising himself until the player crosses his path, at which point his fate is in our hands.